everyone. Welcome back to the class. So, have you watched the last session? Do you know what we have studied in the last session? So, in the last session, student, what happened that we have started a new chapter, that is the separation of the substances, and in that we have studied about what are the type of the elements, that is metals, non-metals, metalloids. Then we come to know that okay, we are having some type of mixtures as well that we called as the homogeneous and heterogeneous. Then we come to know that okay, there is some difference between the compound and the mixture. So that means, student, we have covered up all of these topics. And if I'm not wrong, we have covered solubility also. Fine. Now, students, what the thing is that today we are continuing with the same chapter because we have to learn more things for this chapter. Okay. So now if I ask you one thing, that I'm giving you some mixture, let's say homogeneous or heterogeneous, any kind of mixture, and if I'm asking you to separate out the substances from it, so how you are going to do that? So, students, for that, today we are going to see some of the techniques here, that by using these techniques, you can separate out the substances from the mixture. So, you can see here that we are having so many techniques. So, don't worry that you'll say, ma'am, so many topics we have to cover in one class. So, will be like it will be possible for us to remember each and everything? Definitely, students, because these techniques are very easy. You don't have to be worried about them. They are very easy. It's just that you have to listen it very carefully. So the techniques which we are going to discuss today is decantation, sedimentation, filtration, centrifugation, evaporation, handpicking, winnowing, and sieving. Okay, so these all are the topics which we are going to cover up in today's class. So now start with the session. So first of all, student, that the technique which we are going to study here, it is the sedimentation. You'll say, ma'am, in the topics covered, there is the decantation, and now you are starting with sedimentation. Because, students, when we talk about the sedimentation, decantation, and the filtration, so we have to follow the same order. First, we have to go for sedimentation, then decantation, and then filtration. You'll say, ma'am, now please just tell us something about sedimentation as you are talking about it. So, students, what happened? The sedimentation is a type of the technique in which you can separate out the components. What type of component? If you're having a mixture of the liquid, and in that liquid there is some insoluble solid, so that you can separate them out. How you can separate them out, student? As you can see in this picture, that this water contains some particles which are suspended. You can see here that these particles are suspended, but when you give some time and you will not disturb this water, and that for around 20 minutes, 30 minutes, so after some time, what you will observe, that the suspended particles are settling down at the bottom. And this process, like the settling down of the suspended particle at the bottom of the beaker, or at the bottom, so we call it as the sedimentation process. Fine. And we can see here that this is the clear water, that you can say that the clean water is here. So, students, for example, if I give you one example here, so we can take the example of the scent and water. Fine. If you are having water, and in that water you are adding scent, so we know this thing, that the scent particles are somewhat bigger, and even though they are having small stones will be there, dirt is also there. So what happened, that when you add the scent into it, so scent is not going to be dissolved in the water, because what is scent? Scent is the insoluble solid. So, student, what happened when you are dissolving it into the water? So, what first of all you observe that yes, it is getting dissolved. But when you keep that glass or that utensil undisturbed for some time, so after 15, 20, or 30 minutes, what you will observe, that the layer of the sand is settling at the bottom of the beaker, and that is called as the sedimentation process. Now, how you can separate it? You can transfer that water, that in the upper layer where the clean water is present, you can transfer that water into any other vessel. And what you have to keep remember, or you have to keep it very carefully, so that the sediment is not going to be transferred. Fine. Now you'll say, ma'am, what is the sediment? So the insoluble solid which is settling at the on the bottom, we call it as the sediment. So in this case, sand is the sediment. Okay. And when the sediment settles on the bottom, so we call it as the sedimentation process. So I hope you got this technique, that where you can use this technique where the water is there and the insoluble solid, so that that solid is settling at the bottom. So we call it as the sedimentation process. Fine. Now moving towards the decantation. See students, you can relate sedimentation and decantation. How? When you are doing sedimentation process and the sediment is settling at the bottom, now at the upper layer, as you can see in this beaker, there is the clean water. Now what you can do is you can transfer this clean water into any other vessel, and you have to transfer in such a way that this sediment, that is this mud, is not going to be transferred or is not going to be disturbed, so that the water and the sand can be separated out. And when this clean water is present here, so we call it as the decantate. And when we transfer the decantate into any other vessel, then we call it as the decantation process. So as you can see here, the pouring out of a liquid from a vessel without disturbing the sediment, that we are not disturbing the sediment, is called the decantation. There are some mixtures which contain insoluble solid particles suspended in the liquid. Obviously, that we can see that the insoluble solid are settling at the bottom, they are not dissolving in the water. So it's just that we can separate them out from the liquid by transferring the decantate into the another vessel. So that is called as the decantation process, students. Fine. Now, students, when the decantation is done, now we can do the filtration. Why the filtration or how the filtration is used up? For example, students, when we are having in solid substance, like in solid, oh sorry, you say in solid substance. I'm actually I was trying to say insoluble solid. When we are having any insoluble solid present in the liquid and we want to remove it, and it's just that we are not able to remove it because their size is very small. So you can use the filtration process, student. In filtration process, what happened, that you can see that this is a beaker, and in this beaker there is a mixture of the liquid and the insoluble solid. For the filtration, student, it is very important to use the funnel. So this is the filter funnel, and then this filter funnel, student, we use the filter paper. So it is a very important thing for the filtration that we require the filter paper. And students, filter paper is having the pores. So what will happen, that when you pouring the water, the or the solution over the filter paper, so what will happen, that the solid substance will remain over there and the water will flow down. Water from the pores of the filter paper is getting, you can see that it is flowing down and the impurities are left in behind. So that's how, student, filtration process is used up. But in the filtration process, what we have to use is we have to use the filter paper. For example, student, like if I talk ROs that we are having in our houses for the purification of water. See, it's not like that, student, that we are having only one type of filter paper. We are having different type of filter paper depending upon that what process we are doing. Okay. So in our ROs, there are also special type of filter papers. So what happens, student, when water is coming through any sources and it is entering the ROs, and that RO is having some filter paper. So that is the water is coming now. Water is having some impurities, some unwanted particles, some bacteria are there. So what will happen? This filter paper or this special filter paper is not, or you can say that it will not allow the passage of the impurities from it, and just the water is going to be flow down and the impurities will remain over it. So that's how student filtration process is used up. For example, filtration is a process by which insoluble solids can be removed from a liquid by using a filter paper. An example, you can take the chalk powder and the water, they can be separated out by this method. When you're having any beaker or any vessel, water is there and you're adding the chalk powder and you're stirring it, but it is not getting dissolved. So after some time, when you will observe, so the chalk powder is forming a layer at the bottom. And what will happen when you start filtering it, students? So what happened, that the chalk powder is remaining over the filter paper and water is flowing down. So that's how, student, you can separate out the insoluble solid from the liquid by using the filter paper, and that process is called as the filtration process. Okay, I hope now everything is clear about the sedimentation, decantation, and the filtration. Okay. Now coming to the next technique, that is the centrifugation. Centrifugation is something, student, which I think you have observed in your houses as well. Okay, I'll give you example. If your mother collected the So we can see, student, that it is present in the liquid form. Exactly. Now when you start rotating it with your hand or if with any other instrument, so what will happen, that the butter is getting separated out from the milk. So students, when we have to separate out some denser material from the or the denser substance from the lighter substance, so what we have to use, we have to use the centrifugation method. So in the centrifugation method, student, you can see here that the centrifugation is the process that uses the centrifugal force for the separation of two liquids in a mixture, and in this process, that the denser component of the mixture, it will getting separated out from the lighter mixture, like the lighter component of the mixture. So that is called as the centrifugation process. But in that, student, what we have to remember is that we have to rotate it at a high speed. Okay, if you are not rotating it, so you will not find it out the difference between the two components. So it is very important to do the rotation at a high speed, so the denser component will get separate out from the lighter component. Fine. Now moving towards the another technique. Okay, so it is the evaporation. But for the evaporation, student, first of all, you should know what is the vaporization. So what's the vaporization, students? So the vaporization is a process in which any liquid, if I talk about generally water, so the on heating, like when we are heating it, so it is converting into the vapors, converting into the vapors. So the conversion of the liquid into the vapors with the help of the heat, so this process is called as the evaporation process. Fine. Now, students, if I give you one mixture here, okay, for example, I'm giving you one mixture that is the salt solution. So, in the salt solution, student, what do you think that what is present? So, it would be salt plus water. Exactly. Now, I'm asking you to separate out the salt and the water. You will say, ma'am, how we are going to separate it? So, exactly, student, by using the evaporation technique, you can separate out the substances. How? Because, student, when you start heating the solution of the salt and water, for example, you can see here that this is the that you are heating from here, that the heating is provided from here, and this is the pen. And first, let's say that this pen is having the salt solution. Salt solution is there, and when you start heating, students, so what will happen, we know this thing that the water generally converts into the vapors very easily. So when you start heating it, so the water is getting converted into the vapors, as you can see here, and the salt will left behind, and that's how, student, you can separate out the substances like salt and water by using the evaporation technique. Fine. But, student, for that, it is very important, that among the two components, either of one component will be able to convert into the vapors easily. For example, as we can see here that it is salt and it is that means, students, when you are having any of the volatile and non-volatile substance, then only you can use the evaporation process. Because of that, student, what happened, that the volatile can be converted into vapor easily and the non-volatile will left behind. But can you imagine if both are volatile and both are non-volatile and you are using the evaporation technique? Fine, students. So for the evaporation, it is very important to have the volatile and non-volatile mixture. Okay, so that there will be the separation easily. Okay, so you can see here that if we continuously heat water, it get converted into the vapors. But so the process of conversion of water into the vapor, we called it as the evaporation technique. Fine. So what's the evaporation is? And similarly, student, you can separate out the sugar solution as well. Like sugar will left behind and water is converting into the vapors. So that's how you can use the evaporation method. Fine. Okay, now coming to the hand picking method. Now, students, what's the hand picking? As in this picture, you can observe that the person is using his hand and he is picking out some of these impurities from this cereal. Exactly from the pulses, he is picking out some of the impurities. So, what happens, student, that the hand picking method is used up at that place or at that condition when we are having the impurities, that impurities are somewhat solid in nature, impurity that are solid, but as well as they are having large size, so that you can easily pick them out. Fine. So that's a student hand picking method can be used at that point when we are having impurities that are solid and also a large size, so that you can easily put them out. And that is the hand picking technique. As you can see here, the method in which the substances in a mixture can be separated by just picking them out with the help of hand from the mixture. We call it as the hand picking method. Fine. For example, student, that generally when we cook rice in a house, so what happened that first of all, like before cooking the rice, it's you can say it's our duty to check that whether if it is having any kind of stone in it, or if any other particle is there, if any other we can say impurity is there. So what we can do is that we can pick out any stone from the rice, so that we will not eat it, exactly, because we can't eat stones. So that's how we just remove that stones by using our hands, by picking those stones. So that's why this technique is called as the hand picking technique. Fine. Now moving towards the another type of technique. So it is the winnowing method, students. Now what is the winnowing? So generally, student, or if I say winnowing is directly related with the wind. Okay, just remember one thing, winnowing is related with the wind. How? Now we have to see this thing, that how the wind is related with the winnowing. So students, when we have to separate, like just remember this thing, when we have to separate the heavier component from the lighter component, in that condition, student, we use the winnowing method. That is the process of separating the heavier and the lighter components of a mixture by wind or by blowing air. We called it as the winnowing method. Fine. So this method is used by the farmers to separate the lighter husk particles from the heavier seeds of grain. That, for example, student, that in the crop, when they are growing the grains, we like wheat, rice, or pulses. So what happened that in the field we can see that it is in the open. So there are having some lighter husk particles, some dust particles are there. So when we have to remove those lighter particles from those heavier particles, like from the grain, so what the farmers do, that as you can see here, that this lady is standing at some height and she is taking some cereals like in her hand, and she is just what she's doing, that she's just removing the particles from it. How? When there is a grain, so for example here it is a mixture of grain as well as some husk particle. Fine, students. So when she start doing this technique, so what will happen, that the grains are falling directly to the ground, but the husk, which are very lighter in nature, so with the help of the wind they are just removing from here. And that's how, student, we remove the lighter impurities, or we can say the lighter uh, lighter in nature. That is, if we talk about their weight or mass, so which are lighter in nature, we can separate them out by using the winnowing method. Fine. And it is only because of the blowing air, that when the wind blows, so what will happen, those lighter particles will flow with them and the heavier particles will fall to the down on the earth. So that's how winnowing method is used up, and this method is generally used by the farmers only. But students, I have seen the winnowing method in my house also. Like I am taking the same example, like when we have to cook rice. So we are having rice, okay, and if I see that some dust particles are there, but I can't remove them by using my hand. So what I can do is I just blow air with my mouth, so that the dust particles are removing it. So that's the winnowing method, student, when you have to separate the lighter substance or the lighter impurities from the heavier one. So you can use this winnowing method by using by blowing air. Okay, so that is the winnowing method. Fine. Now coming to the next type of technique. So as we have discussed about all such techniques, so sieving is also a technique in which student what happened that like in the filtration we are using the filter paper, but in the filtration student it's the condition that one thing should be liquid and the another component should be insoluble solid. But student, this sieving method is this used with the help of these strainers, and these strainers as you can see, this person is separating out the cement. Okay, now see. Sieving is a method in which the fine particles are sieved through holes of the sieve while the bigger impurities remain on the sieve. Sieving is used in the flour mill to separate impurities like husk and stones from wheat before grinding it. So students, sieving, as you can see here, that this person is using, this is the siever, okay, this is the sieve, and you can see that some holes are there. See what happens student, that when we have to prepare our houses or any construction work is there, so we have to use cements and many things has been used up. So to remove these stones or the unwanted particles from the cement, so what people do, they put the cement here, the mixture here, and they just start moving here and there. So what will happen, that the cement will pass through it and the stones will remain over it, because student, that the whole size is only that much, that the cement is passing through it, but the larger size particle, for example stones or big pebbles, they are just remaining over that. And with the separation of such type of particles, we call it as the sieving process. Even those students that they are giving the example of the flour mill, okay. So what happens student, that whenever we have like in the flour mill, they want to make the flour from the grains. So what happens student, that the grains are there, so in the grains maybe there are the some particles of the husk and the stones as well. So what they do, that they use some kind of strainer. So this is a strainer, I can say. So they are having such type of structure that they are having some holes. I have made some bigger holes, but they are having very small holes. So what happened, when you wet the grain over it, so the grain is passing from here, but the stones and the husk will remain over it. So that's how student you can separate out it before grinding the wheat. So that's the technique student which we use with the help of the strainer or the sieve, we can say. For example student, if you have also observed this thing in your house, that when your mother is cooking food or when she started making the chapati and she used the flour, so first of all she just separated out some particles from it by you can say that by using some kind of strainer or some kind of sieve, so that the flour will get separate out from the unwanted particle, like any dust particle or any very small impurities there. So the sieving method is used at that point student. Fine. And in that technique, what we use the sieve, so that the fine particles will fall down and the other unremaining, that the unwanted particles will remain over it, and that's how we can separate them out. So this is the sieving process students. Okay. Oh, so now we are having question. That means we have covered up all of the topics like which we have to cover for today's session. That means we have seen all of the techniques. So now what are the questions here? Why do we need to separate different components of a mixture? Give two example. Like why there is the need to separate them out. So basically student, like if I tell you the answer, that first of all we have to separate out the impurities, and when we have to separate out the impurities from the mixture, then we have to use such techniques. Exactly. So among different components of mixture, there are many substances which are harmful or not useful to us. Exactly, like we have to cook rice, and those rice are having some small stones, so we can't use them na, because they could be harmful for us, for our teeth. So that's why it is very important to remove them. So that's how student we can say that for removing some harmful substances or some unwanted substances, so that we can't get harm from it, so we use these separation techniques. Now why we need them? So see, tea leaves are separated from the liquid with the strainer while preparing tea. Obviously, student, when we prepare the tea, they are having tea leaves. So we separate them out by using a strainer. Otherwise, how we are going to take that tea? Na? Otherwise, the tea leaves are also coming in our mouth, and it is not and it not feel good. Fine. So that's how we have to separate them out. Second, stone piece from the wheat, rice or pulses are picked out by hand. Obviously student, as I have given you the example also, that when we have to prepare or cook the rice or pulses, if any stone particles is there, so or stone piece is there, we have to remove them. So why? Because we are not able to eat stones, they are very hard in nature. If you by mistake you are going to eat these stones, so maybe there is a pain in your teeth because they are very hard and we can't chew them. So that's why, student, the separation of the component is very important sometimes from the mixture. Okay. How will you separate husk or dirt particles from a given sample of pulses before cooking? Like before cooking, you have to separate them out. So again, student, you can separate them out by winnowing method because they are very lighter in nature, husk or dirt particle. And when you blow air with your mouth, so they get separated out from the pulses. So you can use the winnowing method. So students, like it depends upon the condition or the type of the mixture, or you can say that the type of the components that which you have to separate out. And that's a student, we are having so many techniques, so you can use any of the technique depending upon the condition, and you will get out the separation. Fine. So with that, student, I hope we have completed the today's session portion, but it's just that we left some of the techniques which we are going to cover up in the next session. But till then, what you have to do is you can watch this video with great attention, and you can learn some different technique. And after hearing all of these technique, if you're having any doubt, any question is there, you can post your doubt or your question on the public or private forum of Ask IITians, and you will get your answers from expert side. And that's our student. We like in the next session we are continuing with this chapter only, and your chapter will be completed with all of with the clearing your all the doubts. So just keep learning and keep studying. And it's just that, thank you so much for attending the session.